Hey, Gatsby. What's the matter?
I don't know how to put this. It's Clive. I think he's evil. I cast a spell to summon an evil force because I was jealous of you two and your friendship. I'm sorry. Well, when I cast the spell, Clive turned up. I think he's evil.
Oh, come on. You're being a little overdramatic, aren't you?
Look at the book. Look here. Let me show you. Read it for yourself.
Oh, come on. Let me have a look at this. Let me get glasses on. This can't be right. Surely you're mistaken. What are we going to do?
I don't know. I'm scared.
Hello, everybody. This week we're going to be talking about the race of elves. Now, elves are just the most magnificent and graceful creatures you will encounter in the Dungeons and Dragons realms. They have this beautiful grace to them. They're living in the world where you encounter them, but they're not entirely part of that world as elves. Kind of disconnected in a way. They live in places of ethereal beauty, like deep in the forests or glittery spires with fantastical fairy lights and other such things when you encounter them in their living environment as a community. They love all the beautiful things in life: art, poetry, music, anything that is just ethereal, kind of beautiful in nature. They love and they embrace. In terms of their appearance, they are hauntingly beautiful and graceful. Humans and other races who see them are captivated by their incredible beauty and grace. In terms of height, they are slightly shorter than humans, probably between 5 to 6 feet in height. They are more slender than most humans as well, weighing somewhere around 100 to 140 pounds. The males and the females of the species are around about the same height and weight, and the men or the males are just slightly heavier than the females of the species, but only slightly. Mostly, they're pretty equal in their appearance, height, and weight. In terms of skin color, most of them have similar skin color to humans, but some of them have a copperish tinge to them, or some of them a bluish white tinge to their skin color. Most of the time, they're very similar to humans in terms of their skin color. Their hair can be green or blue or normal colors that we see within the human range as well. Their eyes are their most captivating feature. They're like pools of silver or gold when looked into. Very almost seductive and captivating when you see them. Elves have very little body hair or facial hair, but they love to wear elegant, colorful clothing. Beautiful, graceful, colorful clothing. But their jewelry is very simplistic. They love jewelry, they love the artistry of it, but they keep that artistry very simple and beautiful. Now, the thing to note if you're an elf is that you live that race lives for 700 years or thereabouts. And much like dwarves, their perspective on events is very different to, say, humans, because they've seen so much and they've experienced so much. So if you're playing an elf, you won't panic about wars or other such things in the same way that humans do, because humans have only experienced a very short life. You, if you are an older elf, may have lived 500-600 years and you've still got another 100 years to go. So as a character, when you are playing an elf, you need to think about things within perspective and not panic about the short-term things, because you've seen kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall. 700-year lifespan or more. You've seen a lot of things. So the things that make humans panic and others panic, just like dwarves, won't be a big deal for you because you see the bigger perspective of things. Because of this fact that you can live up to 700 or more years, you're not as excited about world events. You're more curious about them. So you may, and you won't be greedy for treasure. You may just be curious about why the treasure is there and maybe how people will behave around the treasure and about the treasure. So when you're playing an elf, you're curious about things. You're not so much anxious about getting those things. It's more of a curiosity to you. Observations in passing through the centuries. Wonder what will happen when they do this. Wonder what will happen when this war happens. Oh, there's treasure there. I'm curious about that. I wonder where it came from. Not so much I need the treasure or I'm desperate for the treasure. So remember that if you're playing an elf. You take the long road. You've got centuries of knowledge and wisdom behind you, and you've been raised by centuries of wisdom behind you. And you've got centuries ahead of you, unless you're towards the end of your lifespan. Even then, you are wise and you know not to get too excited about things. Maybe they just amuse you, in fact. It could be just the things of the world are amusing because you know and you've seen so much. Also, because of this long lifespan, you are unfazed by what happens and you remain pretty aloof most of the time if you're going to play an elf. You're in the background. You're not engaging as much in the pettiness of politics and other such things as others would. Having said that, when you play an elf and you're focused on a mission or you have a new skill to learn, you will be focused on that mission or that skill and you'll stay focused on that. So you won't be so aloof. If you have a specific goal in mind or a specific skill that you want to learn to help yourself grow in knowledge, then you will be engaged because it is very specific to what you want and what you want to gain. Much like dwarves, because of their longevity, they are very slow to trust and slow to make friends. So when you're playing an elf and you meet new characters and new team members, you may be aloof for a little while and stepping back before you trust those players. So remember to play that as an elf, because you've got centuries and centuries, and just like the dwarves, you're slow to trust. But once you trust for life, and you've got a friend for life. But you also, if you make an enemy for a very long time, and it's very hard to regain the trust of an elf once you've betrayed it. Petty insults do not upset an elf. So if you're playing an elf and someone insults you, you just brush it off. It's nothing. Unless it's a serious insult to your honor or a serious insult that is personal, in which case you reply with vengeance. That is the core of that whole character of an elf. If there is something that is deeply insulting, they will take vengeance. They will not forget. And it may be a long time down the track before the vengeance happens because they've got plenty of time to plan. They've got 700 years or more. But they will remember. So when you're an elf and there is a very deep insult, you will remember and you will take vengeance. Elves are flexible in the face of danger. They will choose diplomacy over violence a majority of the time, and they will try to find a peaceful resolution to a problem before resorting to violence. So remember that when you're playing an elf. You will not react immediately with violence, and if any of your party members react with violence, you will try and stop them and go down the diplomatic route first. So remember as an elf to do that, because that is part of the character of being an elf. It's in your very being that you will choose diplomacy first before going to violence, and violence is the last resort. A lot of the time when elves are threatened, they will retreat and wait it out because they know they can outweight the enemy majority of the time. But when they are forced to reply, when they are forced to take vengeance, they will use their martial arts brilliantly. They are very skilled with the sword. They are very skilled with the arts of battle and warfare. And once you get into that, it is a very dangerous thing to engage an elf in battle. But again, it's their last resort. They will wait a conflict out rather than go into conflict, and they'll only go into conflict when they have to. Most elves live in small forest villages, and they don't plow or live off the land farming. They will hunt for their food and they will scavenge for their food. They are very talented artisans, and they make beautiful clothing as one of their skills. They don't like dealing with the outside world that much. They're quite happy to be self-sufficient. But when they do, some of them venture out to trade their artworks, their artisan works, their jewelry and other such things in exchange for metals, because they don't like to mine metals. So they will trade to get those metals for their jewelry. If you are playing an elf that is outside of his own forest realm, you will be either an artisan, a minstrel, a traveling minstrel, or someone who is selling their trades to teach others. Many noble people will pay you as an elf to teach their children swordplay or the bow, using the bow and arrow or other such skills, or artisan skills. So you'll be hired to teach children, teach noble children how to do these things. But most of the time, they don't venture out very often. It's rare to see an elf outside of their natural setting, unless they are doing those things like minstrels or artisans in fairs and marketplaces, and looking for ways to sell their wares in exchange usually for metal. If an elf is part of an adventure, it's usually out of wanderlust. They have centuries and centuries to fill in, so they will go exploring just to fill in the time and to learn about the world around them. As an elf, you don't like the ways of the humans, the structure, the constant changes that are going on. They annoy you. So as much as possible, you try to avoid the human ways when you are traveling and exploring the world as an elf. You'll join them every now and then if needs be, but a lot of the time that pace of the human world, that quick pace and the constant change and the daily routines, they're not the ways of the elf, and they kind of annoy the elves, so they try to stay away from that as much as possible. If elves do join in campaigns or with humans on certain things, it's mainly so they can master their artistry in battle, in martial arts, or firing with the bow, getting into the adventure for the sake of advancing themselves and their knowledge and their skills, or to find new magical or advance their magic, or something like that. So if you're an elf and you're joining the adventure, you're not so much joining because you believe in the outcomes that the humans want or the dwarves want or anything like that. You're doing it because you want to practice your artistry most of the time. You don't really care about the emotional side of things. You're more interested in, let's get to the battle so I can practice my artistry, or let's get to the library so that I can learn more about my type of magic. Elves are considered children until about 100 years of age, and they will declare themselves adults when they know that they are ready to be adults. But it's usually around about the age of 100. Before that time, they have a child's name. After that time, they get a new name, which is their adult name. But a lot of the elves that knew them before that time may still call them by their child name. So remember that when you're playing. Know your age and know whether you are still considered a child elf of younger, say up to 100 years, or an adult elf of 100 to 700 years of age. Your name will change when you decide to become an adult as an elf. There's no real distinction between male and female names. They're actually pretty similar. In fact, there's really not much of a distinction at all between male and female names. So it's more about their child name and their adult name, and then their second name or their surname, which comes from their family. So let's talk about elf traits and how they can be an advantage to you in a Dungeons & Dragons game. Why play an elf? What is it about an elf that is a good thing in terms of a race to choose for Dungeons & Dragons? Firstly, your dexterity score increases by 2, which is a great thing for an adventurer. Dexterity is all about reflexes, poise, and balance. So when you're an elf, this is the kind of thing of, can you successfully go across a rope that's over a ravine, or can you successfully react and get good reflexes in reaction to something that's happened or something that's been thrown at you? The reflexes. Are you good at those sorts of things? This is great if you are someone who is an adventurer who's going to dangerous places. So it's a good positive thing to have that +2 in dexterity as an elf. In terms of alignment, elves love freedom of expression. They love to be free to do what they want to do when they want to do it. So in terms of alignment, they lean towards the more gentle side of chaos. They value the freedom of others as well as themselves. So when you play an elf, you'll probably be leaning towards the gentler, chaotic, good side in alignment. The exception to the rule in this is the drow, who have spent so much time in the Underdark that they are corrupted and very, very dark creatures. So the drow would not be so friendly, chaotic good. If you're playing a drow, you would be chaotic evil. In terms of speed, this is a good thing. You've got an average speed of 30. So your walking speed is 30. And that's what most, apart from the smaller ones like dwarves, that's the average walking speed of creatures in this world. So that's a good thing. You're around about the same speed as everybody else when traveling and walking places. One of the advantages in terms of your vision as an elf is your dark vision. You can see in dim light within 60 feet of you as if it were bright light, and in darkness you can see as if it were dim light. So you can make out everything, but you can't in darkness make out colors, you just see grays, but you can still see very clearly. This is a great advantage as an elf when you are in at nighttime or in dungeons and creeping around the dungeons. You can see things far better than humans and other such creatures. As an elf, you have proficiency in perception. Now this is brilliant because what it means is perception. You can see and notice things in your environment that others may not. For example, you could overhear a conversation through a door. You might notice someone lying in wait in the bushes nearby. You might notice something unusual about the room that draws your attention. You might be looking for something and you'll be able to notice things that are a little bit out of place. Perception is a really good skill to have as an elf. It helps you a great deal when you are in an adventure. With Fey ancestry, you have advantage on saving throws against being charmed. So if someone is trying to charm you with magic, you have advantage on saving throws, which is a great thing. But you also cannot be put to sleep by magic. So anybody who tries those tricks on you with Fey ancestry, you're untouchable. And it's very difficult to charm you. Can be done if the saving throw doesn't work, but a lot of the time, from my experience, the saving throws do work. Now let's look at trance. With elves, they don't sleep. They go into trances for 4 hours a day, and in doing so, they have almost dreams, but they're not quite dreams. And in doing so, they regain their energy just like a human would with 8 hours worth of sleep. So 4 hours of trance meditation is all that an elf needs. That's a really good advantage when you're on an adventure and you want to keep moving, or you want to keep an eye on things to make sure that you're safe on the campsite or wherever you are. You only need 4 hours of rest a day. In terms of languages, you know Common and Elvish, and you can write, speak, and read both Common and Elvish. Now let's talk about sub-races. There are 3 sub-races within the elf community. There are High Elves, there are Wood Elves, and there are Dark Elves, more commonly known as Drow. There are even more sub-races than that, but I'm not going to go into those details here. But if you can, there are books that can explain those extra sub-races to you in more detail. Maybe I'll cover them in a future video. Let's take a brief look at the High Elves. Now with the High Elves, you have extra abilities on top of the base abilities you have as an elf. As a High Elf, your intelligence score increases by 1. You are proficient with the long sword, the short sword, the longbow, and the short bow. Now, in terms of magical spells and cantrips, as a High Elf, you have 1 cantrip spell from the Wizard list of spells. Intelligence is your spellcasting ability for that cantrip. One of the other advantages, apart from intelligence for a High Elf, is that you can speak, read, and write another language of your choice. So you can choose a language. Perhaps if you are going to a Dwarvish community, you might want to choose Dwarvish. If you're heading out to a community that has a specific language that maybe you need to be proficient in, you can choose that as your extra language if you are a High Elf. That can be a great advantage in a game in terms of reading what's written on the walls, reading signs, reading maps and letters and other such things. Now let's talk Wood Elves. Now, Wood Elves can quickly travel their way through the forests. They have great skills in terms of dancing around and jumping around and moving around in the forests. Wood Elves have a wisdom score increase of 1. Now remember, intelligence is knowing that something is poison. Wisdom is deciding that's not a good thing to eat that thing. So wisdom is a good thing to have. Again, with Wood Elves, you have proficiency with the long sword, the short sword, the longbow, and the short bow. So again, good proficiency with those weapons. As a Wood Elf, your base walking speed increases to 35 feet rather than 30 feet. So you're faster on your feet than the average person, which is a good thing. For example, if you're being chased by a human or a creature that has a walking speed of 30, you can always remain 5 feet ahead of them if you're trying to escape, like most elves usually do, to wait things out. As a Wood Elf, you have Mask of the Wild. Now this is good because what you can do, even if you have light terrain, you can hide in the slightest fog or rain or things like that. You can hide very easily. So this again is good when trying to flee an enemy or trying to hide from somebody. You have advantage as a Wood Elf on those kinds of skills of hiding. Now let's talk about the Drow. This is a very dark sub-race of the Elves. The Drow developed from another sub-race or another race of Elves, and the Drow were banished from the surface of the earth for following the goddess Lolth. And in doing so, they were no longer welcome on the surface of the world. The Drow have built their own kingdom down in the darkest depths of the underworld. They have white or yellow hair and their skin color is different to any other elf. They're very identifiable. They tend to be thinner and smaller than the other elves. In terms of playing a Drow, this is very rare because the Drow very rarely step out of the underworld. They very rarely enter the world or the realm above. So check with your dungeon master as to whether you can play a Drow or not, because it's almost out of character for a Drow to even try and engage in the world above. They'd have to have a very, very good reason to do so. Having said that, the Drow are an interesting race to play. They have a +1 in their ability score on charisma, which is good for when they're trying to convince people of things or they're trying to win people over to their side. One of the big advantages of playing a Drow is that they have dark vision to 120 feet. That's twice as much as any other elf. Mainly because, of course, they've been in the Underdark. They've been down in the darkness of the realms down below. One of the disadvantages of playing a drow is sunlight. That gives you disadvantage on wisdom perception checks. It also gives you a disadvantage on attack rolls. So it's not a good thing in terms of being in a battle in daylight when you are a drow. In terms of magic as a drow, Dancing Lights is your cantrip, and you can cast that as your cantrip. From 3rd level, you can cast Fairy Fire, but you have to have a long rest in order to regenerate that ability. And from 5th level, you can cast Darkness, but again, has to regenerate with a long rest. Charisma is your spellcasting ability for these spells. Now, as a drow, you have proficiency with rapiers and hand crossbows and short swords. So that, my friends, is the race of elves. I hope that was helpful to you. If you're playing a drow, remember you are chaotic evil and you are hated by the people of the above realm. So be very careful if you are playing that race. Although they do have their advantages, they have their disadvantages in daylight. So you would want to be out at nighttime as an elf if you are a drow. Wood elves and the high elves, well, with the high elves, you're very intelligent. You're somebody who is probably going to be exploring to expand your mind. Wood elves, you are exploring just out of curiosity, maybe even boredom with the life that you have, and you're just out to try and learn some new things. Remember, the most advantageous thing about a wood elf is its walking speed is increased and its proficiency with weapons. High elves, your best advantage is, of course, your intelligence. Wood elves, your wisdom. And drow, well, it's your charisma. So whichever way you want to play, that's elves. Tell me in the comments below if you've played an elf, what kind of elf you played, and what advantages you had. Was there something in the adventure where playing an elf was an advantage and worked really well in your favor? Let me know below. Thanks for joining me this week. Join me next week when we will be taking a look at halflings. All right, catch you next time. Bye.